Winter 2023 and 2024 wasn't what most of us expected. We had snow in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, but not what we thought we'd get. Nonetheless, this year brings a new weather pattern, new change, and hope for more snow this year. Join us on our path to winter 2024-2025. So today what we're going to discuss in this second episode of our Path to Winter series for 2024-2025 is what a neutral condition or a La Nina year for the ENSO would mean for us in the continental United States, what that would mean for our winter, because last week we discussed that we were under a La Nina watch. This week we're going to discuss what that means. We're going to look at some of the current observations again, as well as, and we're going to actually look back into the past, because sometimes if you look back in the past, you can get a sense of what you can expect in the future. But you don't want to dwell on the past, because some things change. Because if you looked at the past all the way back to the early 2010s, you would see that it's a little bit different when it comes to La Nina or neutral conditions than it was in the late 2010s and the early 2020s. Things have kind of flipped on their head a little bit. So that's what we're going to discuss today. And I'm sorry you're not with the big screen today. We didn't have time to do that. But this will be suitable enough, and this is actually better because it gives you a little bit better of a viewpoint, at least for now. We'll be back on the big screen later. So here's a review of our latest conditions. I wish I had a little circle thing so that I can circle some of this stuff for you. I can't do that today. We'll work on that in the future. But our latest conditions show that neutral, when you look at, we talked about this last time on the big screen, there's 4 Nino regions, right? And they range from the western side of South America all the way over towards, as you get closer to Australia. That's Nino region 4. 1 and 2 are closer to, are actually right off of the coast. They're right off the coast of South America. And Nino's number 3 and number 3.4, it's kind of weird how that goes in there, but we're not going to go too much of any detail for this, but the latest conditions, if you go to regions 3.4, which is farther to the west towards Australia and Asia and things of that nature, the temperatures are slowly starting to decline as it pertains to their Nino region 4. The temperatures, they've been in decline, but not at an extremely fast pace. And that makes sense because during a La Nina year, the cooler waters push the warmer waters towards the west, which makes sense why it takes longer to cool down there. Now, Nino region number 3, we can see that it's dipped below average for this time of year, and it's not quite half a degree below average, but it is below average as you head through the months from May all the way to currently, right? And Nino's region 1 and 2, which is closest to South America, that has been below average since about mid-March, and you had a little bit of an uptick in May, but it's pretty much been below average, some of it averaging out to even a degree below average. It doesn't necessarily make it a La Nina though, because you want at least a couple of these regions to be below average. And we're not talking about like 10 degrees below average. We're talking about half a degree to a degree. It takes anything over half a degree, remember from our last episode, to breach the threshold of it being a La Nina. All 4 regions have definitely not hit that. Only Nino's regions 1 and 2. And if you think about it and you look at it has to be over a consistent 3-month stretch. If you think about in July, it definitely dipped below half for a period of time, and it's back below half again near the end of August. And when you look at the national map or the zoomed out map, you can see in Nino's regions 1 and 2, that's where the coolest of the water is. And then as you head off into Nino's 3.4, that's where another aspect, but it's still warmer than average as you head off to the western areas of the Pacific. But it's slowly but surely been stretching over towards the West. It's been slow, but it's happened. So, but right now, what we would consider these conditions to be is a neutral condition, where that means that neither an El Nino nor a La Nina is currently present, right? Now, what we're going to discuss first is the results of a La Nina on the U.S. weather. Here's why. Because the National Weather Service or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration currently has a La Nina watch out because that's what they anticipate to happen. I'm a little bit skeptical, but anything's possible. They expect that to happen, especially if you look at the models and way things seem to be trending. I can get where they're coming from that perspective. So, a La Nina in the United States, around the polar jet stream, it dips down at the eastern into the northern half of the United States. It becomes wetter than average as you head off into the Pacific Northwest. It seems like it's always raining up there anyway, so you think about it's even wetter than average. It's like, wow. Colder than average as you head off into North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana. And wetter than average as you head off into the central Midwest, as you Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, southern Michigan, Tennessee, areas like that are wetter than average, and it's a weird thing for the Northeast because the jet stream kind of comes up the Appalachians, and that's where you get that winter battle zone where you get a lot of those ice storms or mixed precipitation or the rain to snow or the snow to rain type of situations, because that jet stream is just not where you want it to be if you're in the eastern half of the U.S. And it's drier than average because the southern jet stream is not as active, so it's drier and is usually warmer than average. Now, let's look at the neutral conditions. This is what I expect to happen, not just because I'm a snow lover, because as you'll see, neutral doesn't mean that this is going to happen at all. You'll see that in the next, a little later on. The Pacific jet stream comes in towards the Pacific Northwest, so you're dealing with moderately average temperatures. The subtropical jet stream is in the south, in pretty much the southern half of the United States. It's almost like a split. You can get into a zonal flow at times during a neutral winter pattern. The polar jet stream is down towards, and it covers all of the Northeast and the Midwest, so it's usually colder than average. And these are times where you can usually get your average winters out of these, because it gives you a lot of classic setups. But colder than average conditions usually persist in the north, warmer than in the south, and wetter than average in the southeast. So, all that considered, let's look at the last few winters. So let's look at the last few winters. You can go all the way back to 2012 here with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, even further back if you really need to. But we're just going to look at the most recent years. So 2017 to 2018, we had a La Nina year. You could consider 2016 to 2017. We're not going to look at that this year, or this, at least at this point in time. But 2017 to 2018. Then we consider 2019 to 2020. You had a neutral year. You had 2021, 22, and 23. You had 3 back-to-back La Nina years. That usually doesn't happen. You usually flip from one to the other, or one to neutral, and then it goes slowly to the other. This one just La Nina, La Nina, La Nina, La Nina, 3 years in a row, that's really, really rare. All right? And then from that last La Nina year, we went into an El Nino, and it was actually a really strong El Nino. So for those who really want snow, what you don't want is to have a strong El Nino. I tell people this all the time. They look at the snowfall and they're like, "Oh, you want a strong El?" No. If you a strong El Nino, you had one in, like, I think it was 2015 and 2016. We had one big snowstorm in the eastern half of the U.S., but the rest of the winter was really mild, and people called it a fail. Strong El Ninos is one of the worst things that you could get if you want a ton of snow. You really want a weak to a moderate El Nino if you're going to get an El Nino. That often produces more snow in the eastern half of the U.S. Let's go into some of the anomalies, so this video isn't going to have to be too long. 2017-2018, we had what we consider a weak La Nina, and a weak La Nina is anything that has temperatures between half a degree and a degree below average. Anything over a degree below average is considered a moderate La Nina. Anything over you could say a degree and a half to 2 degrees. Anything over that is considered a strong La Nina. This was a weak La Nina, and you can look at the temperatures and how they fit what the typical La Nina would do. This is part of what I mean when I said it flipped. Somewhere between in the 2020s, it kind of flipped what normally happens and what actually happened. Look at is colder than average as Montana, North and South Dakota. Then warmer than average in the east, slightly, but warmer than average. This is between the December 2017 and February 2018. There was some snow in some areas in March. It was colder than average in some areas in March and in November. But we're just talking about the winter season, and meteorological winter starts in December and it ends in February. So that's what we're going to focus on, all right? The precipitation amounts. You can almost say that this is normal, because you see that the wetter than average conditions did extend a little farther south into Arkansas and southwestern Tennessee and stuff like that, Louisiana. It did extend further south, but it also was dry and all the way up into the northeast as well. You can almost, by looking at this, you can almost tell where the storm tracks were. They went right up. You can almost look exactly where the storm tracks were. And drier than average, extremely dry in the areas of California. So that's a little bit strange. So every year is not built the same with these La Ninas and El Ninos. 2019 to 2020, we could consider this a neutral condition. An anomaly means with a departure from average. Okay, that's what an anomaly means. This was actually in the top 20 for the warmest winters on record from December 2019 to December 2020. We had a neutral year. So once again, just because the average over time, when the National Weather Service and the Oceanic Administration has indicated that usually that means colder air for the north, that doesn't always. It was actually warmer all across the north, and it was a little cooler towards the west, which is unlike that. Look at the precipitation though. It was a really the times when it considers when you looked at that map that we showed earlier that talks about precipitation, it did fall right in line with that. So one thing that we're noticing is that we're having wetter winters for the most part. At least in the east, we're having wetter winters, but they're warmer than what typically happens during a typical La Nina year. But it did follow. Then in this neutral year, it did follow the course of what you usually get during these winters. Now, the winter of 2020 to 2021, you had a moderate La Nina, It was warmer than average in the north. You could argue it was cooler than average in the south, which is not normal. It's not normal. I don't know if everybody remember, I believe it was in 2021, you had the polar vortex come down. It kind of got hung up. It didn't come to the east. Really, it was cold, but it didn't come really to east past the Appalachians. It kind of stuck itself in the middle of the nation. And I believe it was Texas that had the Great Freeze down there. It was terrible. I remember watching that on the news. It was really, really terrible for individuals down there. And it was really, really cold. You're talking about temperatures that were in the single digits in the Midwest and stuff like that, or below zero. It was really cold. That was in the month of February. But think about how cold that period was. Yet, overall, for the period of the winter, you can tell the Midwest is still considered warmer than average. That's just how much things have changed. So warmer than average conditions in the north, cooler or around average in the south. So that was an interesting winter. Now, let's look at the precipitation. The eastern half of the U.S. had the precipitation, and I know in February you had storm after storm after storm after storm that brought rain and snow to the eastern half of the U.S., especially in February. And it just, because there was a stalled out front there. And everywhere else, it just was kind of dry. So this was one of those off years based off of what you typically get with those systems. Let's go on further. We had another moderate La Nina the following year. It was borderline. A couple of these were borderline, but I gave the nod to being moderate, okay? So warmer than average conditions persisted in the south and the mid-Atlantic. The only place that was cooler than average, places that were cooler than average, you could consider North Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin. North Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin. So to a degree, that's kind of where it's supposed to be. So you could consider that one almost similar to what it should be. But the warmer than average across the board, that's a little bit unusual. Um, let's look at the precipitation ranks, and you look at the precipitation ranks. It kind of happened exactly where it should be, according to what the normal maps are for a moderate or an La Nina itself. So a moderate La Nina for that year. And you didn't necessarily get much rain in the Pacific Northwest. It was dry in the western half of the United States as well. Let's look at our final year. This is a 2020-2023 La Nina year. This was a warm winter. I remember this winter personally where it felt like I didn't really need a jacket at all to go out on certain days. It was like December, January, and it was like in the 50s and 60s, and it wasn't just like a day or two. This was for long periods of time. You really didn't need a jacket once the sun came up really good. It was a warm winter. In the West, it was cooler than average. So once again, this is another instance where it didn't really follow protocol, but you can kind of sense the vibe here that things are usually that as of late, it's been warmer or slightly above average temperature wise when it comes to La Nina or neutral years. So that's the kind of vibe that we're getting. Let's look at the precipitation ranks. Wetter than average across the board for much of the United States, except for the very mid-Atlantic or the very south and eastern coast. And I remember this winter specifically because we had absolutely almost no snow in the D.C. metropolitan area and Maryland and southern Pennsylvania. Storms either went to our north or they went to our south. That was just the storm track. And a lot of the precip did the same. So we were in a drought a lot of that winter. But everybody else had a ton of rain, a ton of precipitation. And I remember Southern California, Western California really needed that. So these are some things that we did experience in those La Nina winters. So let's look at our latest computer models before we get ready to get out of here. The latest computer models, the mean is the little purple line, which is the average of what you will see. If you look at the average, which is the one in the middle, it shows us the average of being, you could see a weak La Nina is trending towards a weak La Nina. And now this is different than one of our last ones we saw, where all of them were trying to bring us to at least a weak to moderate La Nina. This one is pretty much keeping us down here at the weak La Nina stage. And a lot of most of the computer models are above that. Most of the computer models are bringing in things to be either neutral or slightly La Nina, which a weak La Nina state. The CFS V2, which is a really good model, once again, I told y'all the last episode that we had that sharp nosedive is not something that typically happens here in weather. So that if you look at the projection of where things go as you head off into November, December, and January, I can see us, if it stays on that current trajectory of being in a weak La Nina, but this is bringing you the average and the mean, bringing you all the way down to a moderate La Nina by the time you get into the bulk of the winter. I just don't feel like, sometimes this is really aggressive. I said in the last episode, I've learned from just studying the weather and looking at the weather over the years, you see what these models say, almost cut it in half, that's what you get. So I think that the model predictions and the spreadsheet that you see on your left of your screen is more accurate. So anywhere from a weak La Nina to neutral conditions is what we expect. That's what our current projection remains at this time. It remains the same. We expect neutral conditions for the duration of the 2024-2025 winter season. What would that mean for us personally? Well, going to have to keep watching our series updates. We're going to give you some more information in the future, in the near future, as to what our early projections are for this upcoming winter, and we're going to give you some explanations as to why. Right now, I'm expecting neutral conditions. It would not surprise me if we got to a weak La Nina, but I don't think that the difference is going to be so extreme that it's going to change what our projection is going to be. So see you in another couple of weeks. We're going to have more information out on this as we go further. And if anything changes in the near future, we will bring it to you. Live from weathervance.com, this is Dante Brown Wall, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your week and just keep going. I'm proud of you. Take care. Hello, and thank you for watching another episode or series here at weathervance.com. Come back for more updates in detail.